It's very nice to be with you today, and as Barbara said at the outset, we're talking about the relationship between academics and practitioners in project management, and I wanted to talk to you actually about that relationship in the research enterprise. So the focus really of today's presentation is enhancing thought leadership. And project management is really an interdisciplinary field. And Thomas made, I thought, an important point today when he talked about leadership not being evidenced in most of the standards, PMIs, and some of the other ones that abound today. And obviously the soft skills piece is something that is important, I think critical over and over again. We've seen it in the research. Given that it is an interdisciplinary field, though, one of the things I think that project management does, and suffers from actually to its detriment, is that it doesn't dip into the many fields from which you come. For a show of hands, for instance, how many of you have an engineering undergraduate degree? How many in business? Computer science? Just look at all of that. I'm social science. Any social? Pardon me? Psychology, okay. So as you see, we come from different fields to start, and we somehow find our way to this area called project management, some of whom refer to it as a discipline, and others like me who talk about it just as a field. I don't think it has the criteria, the definitional criteria for a discipline, but in any case, we find our way here. Pardon me? Not yet, anyway. We find our way here to this field of practice from many disciplines. And we have an aversion, it seems to me, to dipping into the fields from which we came to see what has been done there. And for instance, in leadership and team building, there is an enormous amount of literature in the field of psychology that project management does not draw on, for instance. And we should draw on it. And in management literature per se, in the more general management literature, and in sociology literature, as a social scientist, of course, I'm familiar with that literature. And there are many themes and concepts that have been around for hundreds of years in that discipline that aren't drawn from in project management. And it's a question of why we don't do it and why we insist on reinventing the wheel in that regard. It's also an applied field, as we know, with both a practice component and an academic component. And I think the fact that we are interdisciplinary and we are applied gives us both a richness and a challenge. And the richness is obvious, I think. And so is the challenge, by the way, because we know that the dialogue between academics and practitioners has not always been an easy one. And we want to explore some of the reasons why that's the case. So why should we collaborate in the research enterprise? Why should academics and practitioners come together? That's a question that we want to ask today and hopefully answer. I'd like to present just some brief results from 2 workshops that we've held in the past to give you some idea of what the practitioners and academics defined as the obstacles and the opportunities to the research enterprise, and then use this kind of as a third iteration of that workshop to see what your views are. So the core purpose of PMI, and you know, I am a representative of that organization, is to advance the science, the practice, and the profession. So what is it that academic resources do? Our mission really is to augment knowledge production and knowledge dissemination in project management. Now, Thomas talked about the triple constraint in the practice of project management, and I think that this is the knowledge triangle. So we're talking about triples and triangles in both practice and in education and research. So in the academic research arena, where knowledge is generated, what do we have? We have research, we have teaching, and we have practice. The reason people teach is to train practitioners. Practitioners give back to the teaching and research enterprise by participating in research. That research entails then producing more information that is fed into teaching, and there the cycle begins and there the cycle ends. So we want to find ways to develop mutually advantageous relationship in this enterprise, and therefore hopefully have research questions that really respond to the needs of the workplace. Some of the, I mentioned earlier, some of the challenges of research that is spawned by both academics and practitioners have to do with the fact that the field is interdisciplinary. There are many interdisciplinary fields that have the same kind of challenge, but some of them have been more successful than we have in terms of getting researchers and practitioners on the same page and having some dialogue with each other and bringing research questions to the academics that really are helpful in the practice and daily life. There has been more and more interest generated recently in the linkage between academics and practitioners. And I presented here a couple of examples of them for you to digest. One is that last month, the Eastern Academy of Management, which is a division, a regional division of the Academy of Management, had its annual meeting. And the theme of that was the scholar plus practitioner. So they're very interested in this relationship, and choosing it for an annual meeting topic is an indicator of that. In addition, in April, the month before, I attended a meeting of the Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychologists in Chicago, and their numbers were about 8,000 people. And it was really interesting to talk to the people who were there, because many of these psychologists who were consultants on project teams. But there was very little evidence of an overlap between project management and the organizational psychology people. And it was interesting to listen to their presentations, because there you really hear the concepts of team, of leadership, and all the soft skill areas that we talk about over and over again, discussed in depth. And it's not to say that project management hasn't done a good job in some of its research that addresses soft skills, but it could do a much better job of it if it went to and dipped into the literature of organizational psychology, whose constructs in these areas, I believe, are much more fully developed than those in ours. So in their meeting, in addition, the president of their organization chose as a focus for his year of the presidency to focus on the relationship between the science and the practice of psychology, of organizational psychology. So again, the focus of that organization this year was that practitioner-academic relationship. And finally, just recently in April, I believe, there was an article published in the Academy of Management Learning and Education Journal on this relationship, and that's one of the premier management journals, actually internationally, not just nationally. So you can see now that there is a growing interest in the area, and I think it's time for us to really exploit it, given this atmosphere. So what have we done to date in this area? We've conducted 2 workshops, informally actually. We didn't really start out to say, let's formally do a workshop and look at what academics and practitioners think of this relationship and how it can be augmented and how we can really buttress that kind of linkage. But in any event, last year we had a research and education conference in Washington, and we used that opportunity to really have a dialogue with the practitioners and academics who attended. And so that was so we drew some of our results from that meeting. And then in October, there was a Leadership Institute meeting that PMI runs at its North American and EMEA congresses. And again, we repeated that kind of exercise with the academics and practitioners who participated in that. Although in the first group at the conference, there were more academics. At the second group, there were more practitioners. So we got some interesting results, but we also had some overlap in terms of the results. So I'd like to see what you think of some of these some of the questions that we asked. The way we did it is we just gave a very brief overview. We asked them to divide into groups and to self-select by whether they thought that there was a high opportunity for research in their industry or their firm. If they were an academic, we asked if there was a high demand on their part to get into organizations and to partner with practitioners in the research enterprise, or obviously whether there was a low demand and a low opportunity. So people self-selected into these groups. So the exercise today is very similar to that. What I'd like you to do, and you can just, it'll give you a chance to kind of take a little break at the same time that you're giving us a little information so you can get up and stretch. But just choose, 10 or 12 people to sit and talk to for a little bit. So self-select into a group and then discuss the potential opportunities for collaboration in research. There's actually some research going on now in the looking at the similarities and dissimilarities between project managers and change managers. And it's pretty interesting stuff because, as you well know, as project management, you're involved in change control. But then there's also the issue of change management and whether or not project managers are called on to implement change that has been, for instance, the result of a merger or something else. So there is overlap in terms of the roles in some aspects, and then there's diversity in others. Okay? I just want to review with you quickly some of the themes that you've raised and the issues you've raised were raised by other groups of academics and practitioners that I've spoken with too. Here are some of the opportunities that were identified in the past two groups that I led. Obviously, and someone mentioned it here, academics not only want, but they need access to industry, and they need collaboration with you in order to do the kinds of research and ask the kind of questions that will, help you in your practice. Practitioners want to be seen as something more than just a source of data. If they're going to collaborate, they want to collaborate in a real way. Not just as an endless font of information for academic audiences. The academics said that in many instances they found it very rewarding to work with industry and organizations because the mindset is different and it enhances their way of thinking about things. And I guess in this field, like again, as I mentioned in the interdisciplinary / applied fields, one of the benefits is that most people who are teaching students of project management were industry experts themselves at one point. It's not usual that people are traditional graduate students in project management going directly from undergraduate school to graduate school like they do, for instance, in the humanities. So here, the faculty are people who were practicing project managers, and that makes them very different. So now, some of the academics said that here were some of the obstacles that they identified. And again, some of these have been discussed here as well. There isn't a lot of reward. The reward structure in academia doesn't value very, very applied research. They don't have much organizational support for research, so they have to look for external funding, so that holds things up in a way. They acknowledge that there's a different language that's spoken in industry versus academia, and that can sometimes create a challenge. I mean, we know how parachuting into another country can feel very different. And I think practice parachuting into a journal, for instance, or academia into industries can sometimes feel the same way. There also was differences in terms of what the word time means. Time for an academic is very different than time and a time for a practitioner. Even the academic calendar is organized differently than industry's calendar when you think about it. I mean, in academia, the year starts in September. It doesn't start in January like most, or in July like yours does on a fiscal basis, for example. What did practitioners say? Takes time from industry. Concern about academic snobbery, for instance. They felt that researchers, particularly from the US, were too theory-oriented and not sufficiently applied. They thought some of the quality of the surveys that people used were substandard. Often no incentive to participate. So you see that some of these themes have emerged over and over again. I thought this one was really interesting. Researchers are afraid to talk to practitioners. That came up actually more than one time. So often the case, I've also heard the reverse, where practitioners are intimidated by the academics. So it was interesting to hear this piece of the puzzle. So what can we do to bridge the gap between the two groups and, really come up with better research as a result of it? Some of the suggestions that have been made in past groups include the following. Publish findings for two audiences. Because let's face it, the reality is that practitioners don't read academic journals and academics don't read practice journals. So we have to be able to share that information in some way. So one of the things that I'm hoping to do at PMI, when we sponsor a research project, we're going to start to ask the recipients of the fund to write a very short article for practitioners in addition to whatever else they deliver in the report, so that it could be a way to get out there. Someone else suggested a research digest that would just, publish a, one-page summary of everything that came out in a journal. Use meetings to match researchers with practitioners where there can be real dialogue in terms of what are some of the burning questions that need to be answered that practitioners want to put on the table. And the other thing, too, is there is a lot of research out there that oftentimes practitioners will say, well, I wish somebody would have done something on this question. The fact of the matter is it already exists, they just don't know about it. So there's misinformation on both sides. And, to facilitate an exchange between the topics that industry's interested in and academia's interested in, because they do exist, and we can come together in ways, I think, that can produce a real richness of information. So in closing, I just want to mention there are some specific values that really underpin an interest in a connection between academics and practitioners in the research enterprise. And one of them is collaboration. You really have to value collaboration in order for this to be effective. You have to have respect for each dimension of project management, whether it's scholarship or it's applied practice. And you have to really value diversity of thought and intellect, because everyone has something different to contribute and can define and redefine things in a different way. And a respect for, I think, what is important, like really wanting to know what is important. Because, in the role that I play at PMI as the manager of academic resources, one of the areas is, that I'm responsible for is research funding. If I read a proposal, it's really very interesting. I can remember reading some that was an elegant proposal. It had all the important elements of a good proposal, well spelled out, detailed, et cetera, and in the end, I said, gosh, this is a great proposal. And then I said, but who cares? I mean, the question was like, who cares? I mean, it wasn't that important. So what we really have to do is get together at the beginning, not at the end of research. I mean, often what happens is, let's look at the implications. But the implication stage is too late. Let's talk about it in the beginning. So that's my message for you today, and I thank you for your participation. I always learn a lot more than I give at these things, and thank you.